Venerables. Glad to be here today. Before I started, can I ask a question? Are you familiar with the director of the Tibetan and Mongolian Culture Center, Bloomington, Indiana? Jia Rinpoche? Okay. I met him in July, and he mentioned about such a place. I thought, it is your place. Yeah.
I don't love him, but
have any venerables from Bloomington, Indiana ever visited here?
He visits DDSC fairly
So
frequently.
another place?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, then it's not here.
Yeah.
All right. It's my first time here. I'm honored. And I'll try to keep my topic short tonight. It's tonight's topic is generated by one general observation, but it's been ongoing for years. I have learned through researches by social scientists that indicated during the past 2 decades, American younger generations have been losing appetite for religion. On the other hand, the same research indicated that even though the younger generation is staying away from established religions, their appetite for spiritual teachings have been increasing. Now, that's really a very good thing or a very profound thing for us, the monastic, to think about. We claim we practice Buddhism as a form of religion, but among other things, it's based on some spiritual teaching. We believe that 2,500 years ago, we have, the Buddha that is, had indicated clearly what really as the foundation of that spiritual teaching. But curiously, after 2,000 years, there are so many different branches, so many different traditions trying to relocate it. So tonight I am drawing from one ancient text, the Sutta Nipata, and its commentary is complete. This particular text, let me address it a little bit. Okay, this is one of the most ancient Buddhist texts, coming from about the same period of time when the Dhammapada was first compiled, Fa Ju Jing. And for some Buddhist scholars, they claim this should have been the real, authentic early Buddhist text. For others, such as Bodhi Bhikkhu, he made a more moderate statement in that this particular compilation certainly contains one of the most ancient texts, but it also contains some of the more relatively recent Nikaya type of text. So what I want to emphasize tonight then is that among the 8 or 9 major themes covered by the Sutta Nipata, 3 of them probably is most relevant to what I want to talk about today, namely in terms of rank order. The first major theme covered in the Sutta Nipata is that the virtues of renunciation and the proper life of the ascetic. Keep in mind the time when the Sutta Nipata was first compiled was prior to the monastic tradition had become dominant. And if you read through the entire text, clearly that these were not practiced, not actually instructed to bhikkhus or monks or nuns alone. Instead, the so-called Dharma being practiced in those texts were being practiced by the wise one or the wise people. So as you can see here that this is a clear indication that in early Buddhism, it was never intended for monastic only, but instead it was indicating a path for the wise one, namely every one of us here, as long as you are willing to take the wise way. So the first is that, all right, the virtues of renunciation, this is desirable but not necessary, okay? The virtue of renunciation, and then second to that, ethical virtues and dangers of lack of. So first it indicated the desirable virtue of renunciation. And secondly, on top of that, there are also other forms of virtues that you need to cultivate. It even gives you the clear indication that when you are lacking those other types of virtues, what are the dangers? So this is the second theme. Thirdly, and this is very interesting, re-evaluation of contemporary, oftentimes the Brahmanical views. Now, virtues, back to the time when the Sutta Nipata had been compiled, was precisely when in Hinduism the Brahman idea was most dominant. As you know, in the Nikayas, the Buddha himself spent quite a lot of time either disputing or overthrowing, turn the table altogether about this Brahmanic idea, which in a large part also talks about virtue. So people back then, as well as now, have a hard time distinguishing, well, you both talk about virtues, talk about cultivation of virtues. How do we make a difference between you two? And certainly, many people claim there is no difference between Buddhism and Brahmanism. Therefore, I'm going to spend some time using the Sutta Nipata and its commentary explaining one particular idea that been elaborated throughout the entire text. And yet, in today's context, we are viewing it way too narrowly. That is the term of Muni. Now again, let's keep the historical context in mind. It was the time when monastic tradition was still being established, not yet dominant. And the Buddha Dharma, or people, the wise people who practice the Dharma or practice the Buddha's teaching, they claim that the real, the authentic Dharma is perfect, meaning nothing more to be added. Still, you have to at least articulate such perfect Dharma to some extent so that people can at least understand or practice it. And let me give you one particular example. As you see from here, it was the Buddha just prior to the Sakyamuni, namely the Kassapa Buddha, who had a long conversation with one of the Brahmins. And this particular Brahmin overheard from one of his friends that the Kassapa Buddha was eating meat. He confronted Kassapa Buddha directly, asking him that, do you eat so-called charya, namely meat? If you do, then you are charya. You're no longer a Buddha. And on that occasion, the Kassapa Buddha simply told him that, no, you are wrong. Eating meat per se is not charya. In the Buddhist idea, if you walk around containing inside of your consciousness, having anger, having vanity, having obstinacy, having hypocrisy, envy, boastfulness, these undesirable qualities, if you walk around having those qualities in your mind, you are charya. That's how Buddhists define it. And so, on that particular occasion, in this occasion, it was Kassapa instead of Sakyamuni, directly challenged and overthrown the original Brahman idea, thereby transformed the original idea of Brahmanism with a new Buddhist implication. This had happened quite a lot of times. Still, even back then, they did not directly using the term of Arahant to describe somebody who had completed all those perfect virtues. Instead, they're using a series of different terms, and that's the interesting part. Now, using the Kassapa Buddha's example, people walk around having anger, vanity, obstinacy, recalcitrance, hypocrisy, envy, all these stuff. They are Charya. The implication is that when you do not have those undesirable qualities in your mind, then you will be the opposite, the one who deserves offering. Nowadays, we simply equate that idea someone deserves of offering as Arahant. But in the Sutta Nipata, it wasn't the case. They were actually described using other terms. Okay, so I want to emphasize those different terms so that you can have a better understanding of why is it now we seem to have lost about what is really the spiritual ideal back to early Buddhism. As you can see here, in most of the cases in Sutta Nipata, someone who is free of chariot, someone who deserves offering, was oftentimes described as Muni. As you know, Jainism, even today, still uses the title of Muni. And predominantly in the, say, Chinese Mahayana, Chinese Buddhism, they simply describe Muni as a quality of having or demonstrating the quality of quietude instead of being a saint, which really is a little bit a far cry from its original meaning. That given the context in these texts, Shakyamuni essentially means the saint who came from the Shakya tribe. It says nothing about the quietness of this particular person, although you can infer that being a saint, you certainly would have those qualities, but that's by implication, okay, not in the literate translation. All right, Muni then would be free of chariot. Namely, this person would not take in lives from sentient beings, would not take something that is not given, would not have inappropriate sexual relationship, would not tell lies, certainly would not use intoxicants that contaminate his own spiritual quality. Essentially, the 5 precepts would have been properly cultivated as a minimum. That having said, let's go ahead look at worthiness, Arahant. The worthiness is delineated by conducts that are individually performed but are social in nature. Up to this point, the ideal of Muni is still quite similar to that of Brahmanism. Namely, I want to emphasize this particular statement that the conducts were being practiced, cultivated at individual level, but the nature of those cultivations are social. As I have just indicated, you do not kill, you do not harm lives, you do not take what is not given, okay? You do not have inappropriate sexual relationship, you do not tell lies. All these, the 5 precepts, essentially are social in nature. So on that point, Buddhism shared, or let's put it in a different way, the Buddhist ideal actually has a universal appeal. Okay. Then, the virtuous values praised by Buddhism, however, do contain individual appealing. It is more human and more than religious. I think we go back, if we choose to go back to the spiritual ideal demonstrated by early Buddhism through these texts, we wouldn't be so perplexed as many contemporary Buddhists do, in terms of what is the real Buddhist spiritual ideal. It's here. Okay? You practice at the individual level with the good virtues that are social in nature. Not very difficult. Still, that having said, let's deal with those terms that give us the confusion. As you can see here, all these terms can be found repeatedly under different contexts in either Nikaya or here in this instance, the Sutta Nipata. Arahant, Bhikkhu, Brahmana, Muni. Under certain circumstances, all these can be used interchangeably to a point. During different historical periods, they do have different implications. So I am going to elaborate, hopefully, every one of them one by one. Start from Arahant. The picture will come last. In the Nikayas, the term Arahant denotes the type of person who have realized the final goal. I want to emphasize that type of person. Even though most of us, myself included, at least not too long ago, that Arahant actually refers to the individual who are accomplished, who have witnessed the state of Nibbana. But here it clearly indicates no. Instead, it indicates the type of person who have witnessed the state of Nibbana. Now, the implication is that this is a category. Therefore, it could include different type of people who may or may not be monastics. And actually, according to the commentary of Sutta Nipata, there are actually 6 types of munis, clearly supporting my suspicion here. We'll come to that later. So, Arahant indicates the type of person who have realized the final goal. In the Sutta Nipata, I'm sorry, the N should be in small letter so that you won't be confused with the Samyutta Nikaya. Okay, this is in small letter N. The word Arahant is more often restricted to stock prose on the Buddha's epithet, or the announcement that a particular monk became an Arahant. This is more likely the case later on, especially in the Nikayas, but not necessarily in early texts. I want to emphasize that again, early on, it only stated that this is being practiced by the wise one, which could be a householder. Buddha defines the true Brahman as an Arahant with influxes destroyed. So here, on the one hand, it describes the quality of being an Arahant, where we have all the influx destroyed, the tense, the asava, okay, being destroyed, or outflux, either way. On the other hand, it's describing that a true Arahant is equivalent to a Brahman. Here, it is really transforming, the original term of Brahman into a new Buddhist idea of true Brahman. To save time, I can quickly summarize that the difference between the Buddhist idea and the original Hindu idea being that under the Buddhist context, we reiterate a true Brahman, an Arahant, must even given up the adherence or obsession of ideas, views. You have to give up that there is such a thing as the ultimate view. But in Hinduism, that is not the case, okay, among other things. All right, so this is a person having cultivated those virtues perfectly, and here are the pictures using simile. Now, Buddha in himself, back into those early days, really demonstrated a outstanding pedagogical skill that if you're facing a group of people, the audience is predominantly illiterate. They don't understand the big words. Okay, they probably don't even understand the meaning of Brahman. How do you describe the difference between a untrained and a trained saint? Here it is. That's a very ordinary swan, and that's a peacock. That would be the established saint, noble disciple. That would be the ordinary practitioner, untrained. Okay, so it's a matter of choice, but you can be this. Right? So that's Arahant, worthy of offering. Next, by comparison, the term of bhikkhu. In the Sutta Nipata, all these other three terms, including bhikkhu, brahmana, and muni, they are much more frequently being used to designate the ideal figure, a person who is accomplished as we understand it today. So that means what we understand today as Arahant back then would be described as simply just a bhikkhu. Then the implication is that if you are the so-called old school, you prefer to apply the ancient implication to our contemporary context, then you have to really be careful when using the term of bhikkhu. We're not so good yet. Okay. Hey. So anyway, bhikkhu, brahmins, and muni. Since only the best qualified practitioner of the Buddhist path can be called bhikkhu, so given the context, it has two possible implications. Number one, normally, bhikkhu then would mean an ordained monk. Why? Read that statement again. Only the best qualified practitioner. Yes, granted, householders still can practice. Yes, there is a possibility, although much more remote, that householders can also witness the state of Nibbana, much harder. So, by definition then, monks, or ordained monk or nuns, okay, I haven't mentioned is that the term of muni in Sutta Nipata actually refers to both gender, male and female. And in numerical terms, they almost happened on equal terms, meaning almost on equal number of occasions referring to either male practitioner or female practitioner. Okay, that's something for you to think about too. Anyway, so the best qualified, meaning the monks or nuns of the Buddhist, can be called bhikkhu. And then later on, the term bhikkhu was extended to designate one who has realized the goal. Now, in terms of who has realized the goal, in this particular instance, bhikkhu is equivalent to arahant. No difference. Okay, let's move on then. So, since we have two terms pointing to the same type of people, what are the good qualities these people may have? In the Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, and here in this instance, the Sutta Nipata, I cannot say for sure. It may be coincidental. If any one of you know about it, you can just tell me. All these three different compilations of texts talked about 7 qualities, not 5, not 6, not 8, but 7 qualities that a bhikkhu or a muni should have possessed. Now, it would be interesting if we make an in-depth comparison about these 7 different qualities. I haven't done that yet, but it would be a very interesting topic. Okay, so what I am referring to here tonight is using the Sutta Nipata. Okay, number one, the ideal bhikkhu would be not unlike an arahant. I have just demonstrated that. Number 2, this would be a wonder in the world, back in Buddha's days, bhikkhus do not stay in the monastery. No, they move around. Okay, so another affirmation that this would be an ordained nun or monk. Then this particular person would have utterly released from things that fetter, essentially 10 fetters, meaning the subtle, the very finest, subtlest forms of taints would have been released. This person has abandoned greed and existence. Here, existence is somewhat ambiguous. For some, they argue that this would have been the Arahant who are about to abandon his final physical existence. Some disagree and instead argue that this is simply to say that the greed for having this current existence, meaning you want to live longer, or having another existence, meaning the next rebirth. Instead, these type of scholars argue that an ideal bhikkhu would no longer want for, meaning greed, the current existence. We simply live it out. And certainly there's still no desire for him or her to have another existence. Okay, your choice. No longer harbors latent tendencies. Okay. No more the desire, okay, not even the intention to pretend that you are being superior, that you are being outstanding, or say, in order to draw sympathy from others, that you are being poor whatsoever. And has destroyed the influxes, I have just mentioned that as well, and has eliminated conceit, the arrogance. Not unlike those described by the Majjhima Nikaya with some variances, and also not unlike what you can find in the Samyutta Nikaya. But here it describes largely what kind of spiritual idealism or components of spiritual idealism in early Buddhism. Okay, both the Kassapa Buddha and the Sakyamuni Buddha did their part transforming some of the original Hindu terminology with new Buddhist context. Now, Brahmana is one very good example. This original term from Brahmanism was being reinterpreted by the Buddha. And in addition to what I have just described about real Brahman in Buddhist context would abandon the idea of so-called ultimate reality, even that would have to abandon. But early on, the intellectual part was played down. Instead, it was more addressing the mundane implications for the ordinary audience. So here, the difference being that in Buddhist context, a real Brahman is not given by birth. Okay, that's the distinguishing quality. Anyway, if you're interested about what other things may matter, we have an expert here. Please ask that Professor Habar. Okay, the Brahman will be the one who has cut off all feathers, just like the Arahant or the Muni, bears his final body, not yet, but just live it out, dropped his lust and hatred, and reached the supreme goal. So, who does not grasp any view as supreme would be the qualifying difference between the Hindu idea of Brahmana or the Buddhist idea of Brahman. Now, we don't want to engage too deep into that terminological differentiation. Instead, what I want to emphasize is that during different contexts, the term of Brahma, Muni, Bhikkhu were referring to essentially almost identical set of individual virtues that relating to behaviors that are social in nature. That probably is the most important thing we can take away tonight. Still, let's take a look at, in their own terms, what have been the Brahmana qualities. This would include, among other things, this is not comprehensive, but a very useful example, peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, religiousness. With the exception of religiousness, probably Buddhists can agree with all the others. But arguably for some, religiousness should also be included. Anyway, these are the natural qualities by which the Brahmins work. And ironically, I have visited a few websites administered by modern, contemporary American Hindu temples. It seems that quite a number of them argue that these good qualities can only be cultivated when one practices occupations that requires these qualities. I do not know enough about contemporary Hindu practitioners in America to either challenge or concur with the statement here. But anyway, this is something a lot of them are claiming nowadays. So the good qualities are related to what they practice. And so they also propagate that there are certain occupations particularly conducive in cultivating these virtues, which include being a priest, being an astrologer, yoga teacher, and the Ayurveda doctor, Vastu consultant, traditional music teachers, and not surprisingly, they have discovered a huge demand or lack of, for that matter, such positions in the United States. They are encouraging Hindu practitioners to create more that type of occupations for the purpose of offering opportunities for people to cultivate their good virtues. Now, we can put aside about whether their beliefs manifest the ultimate truth, but their intention and the way they motivate their followers in terms of that boosting those good virtues through some social practices is at least a very useful implication for Buddhists as well. So to quickly summarize it, up until this moment, clearly there's a direct connection between the sphere of social ethics back to Buddha's days, during the time when Sutta Nipata were being compiled. Because back then in India, the truth that lie between the gods and demons is not about when or from where you were born, but it's about the truth. So having knowledge of that kind of truth and then put that knowledge into practice is the foundation of the entire practice. So ethical perfection was actually a condition for the attainment of truth and salvation in India. It still remains the case even today. On that matter, they are no different from Buddhism. So be really careful when you criticize other followers of religions, okay, especially about Hindus. Then let's come to the last term, Muni. The word used most often again, that should be the lowercase of Sutta Nipata, to represent liberated sage, okay, Muni. It didn't use Buddha, it didn't use Arahant, but instead Muni. Whether that has to do with the contemporary back then, the Hindu or the Indian cultural environment in general, I don't know, I cannot say for sure. But I can state that this is the case if you read through the text. Muni then, meaning the liberated sage. So, in today's context, it's equivalent to Arahant. And in terms of quality, this particular Muni would have an in-depth realization beyond the depiction, okay? Meaning it would have achieved the essence of Munihood. That term would be Mona. And actually that term can also be found in early texts. Sometimes, but less frequently, the term Muni was used to refer to the enlightened Buddha, Sakyamuni. But if my remembrance is correct, only once in Sutta Nipata. And according to the commentary, it was a very rare occasion. Somehow, the Chinese Buddhists nowadays predominantly know about the Shakyamuni through that term. Okay, there are 6 types of munis. I might have to go a little bit faster. Householder munis, meaning those householders who have seen the state of Nibbana and understood the teaching, they would be householder munis. I am aware about the general impression of today's Theravada Buddhists in terms of that they believe a householder, if he or she has witnessed the state of Nibbana, there can be only 2 occasions. He or she would have ceased this particular life, cessation of existence, or become an Arahant, manifested as a monk or nun. No other possibilities. But here, if you read this, clearly the householder Muni does not have to be an ordained monk or nun to achieve Nibbana. So I'll leave the argument aside. Okay, I'm just stating that there is this thing. Number 2, homeless Muni. This clearly indicates the ordained monk or nun who are able to witness the state of Nibbana, period. And most likely, this will be the Arahant as we understand it today. And number 3, trainees, Arahant, Pachaka Buddhas, all these, they would be the Arahant as we understand it today, meaning they are by now beyond training. No more training for that. Okay, these would be another type of Muni. And finally, the Buddhas, the Munis among Munis. This particular description, if you will, calling the Buddha as Muni among the Munis, it really, there is no better way to put it in a clearer sense that Muni, similar to the term of Arahant, is a category, the type of people. Okay, so there are different type of Munis, and among them, Buddha, Muni of the Muni, who have achieved the perfection of all virtues. Paramita, if you recall. Therefore, the idea was originally implied in those contexts without using the terms. Okay. So, let me conclude. I'm running out of time. We still have another speaker here. In the Nikayas, Muni was used somewhat differently. Typical usage of Muni would be a monk in training. I have indicated that Muni of the Muni was also being called a Muni, that is, without no more training. But it was only used only once, Sakyamuni. Most other conditions in the Sutta Nipata, Muni was describing a monk still in training, which means among those so-called 4 pairs, so 8 saints, who are about to be the one returner, achieve the one returner, and so on and so forth, with the exception of Arhat. All 7 of them are still in training. So all 7 of them can be rightly described as Muni. So the sutta, in the Nalaka Sutta, it also used Moneya to refer to the practice of attaining Munihood, meaning you are being a Muni, practicing the right way to trying to achieve the final Munihood, Moneya. So therefore, Muni will be one who, even though still being trained very diligently, this particular person must be earnestly taken up this practice. The implication certainly would be toward the end of your life until you have witnessed the state of Nibbana. So anyway, what I want to emphasize is that in this particular sutta, it also gives very practical guidelines of what the early Munis would have to really pay attention to. Okay, as you can see listed here, only 4 of them, all very mundane things. Women would be seducing Munis. Therefore, being someone who are still being trained, you must guard against temptation. Keep in mind, there is no gender discrimination here. Here, even though it's using women seducing monks, it can be applied into men seducing nuns, because there were clear indications in the suttas. Okay, both things happen. Resort to the woods, sit under a tree, be in a meditator, clearly. Behave properly, go for alms run, meaning even though you should find a secluded area as much as possible and meditate, you do not isolate yourself from the larger society permanently. Instead, you should maintain some minimal contacts. Okay? And then manifest self-control and mostly silent. Self-control, I have other slides, but I'm going to skip them. The most predominant concern about self-control back in those days was not about staying away from visual or sensual desires. No, it was simply staying away from disputes and quarrels, either in your own group, either in the monastery, or in any group of people you happen to be in. If a dispute already arisen, stay away from it. And a person who is able to stay away from it, preventing oneself from getting engaged in that kind of situation, eventually would have achieved the Munihood, Moneya. Now, this is why in the Chinese tradition, Muni was being understood of having the internal quietude. It's indicating the end result without describing the process. Okay, so I'm sorry I did not give a complete presentation. I actually have 5 more slides, but I'm running out of time. So if you're interested in the topic, I'll make myself available after the presentation. Let me stop from here. Thank you.